Hello and welcome to Big Lit Online, and a very warm welcome to our guest Yvonne Ridley, who is a writer and journalist of some repute. Intrepid, courageous, some might say a wee bit rash in her pursuit of the story, she's had a fascinating life, which alas we've only got a short time to do justice to, so we'll give it our best shot. Born in County Durham, Yvonne's very proud of her working class roots. She entered journalism straight from school and has worked for papers including the Sunday Times, the Observer, the Independent on Sunday and the Daily Mirror, as well as freelancing for titles like the Washington Post, the Tripoli Times and the Tehran Times. Moving from Fleet Street in 2003, Yvonne went to Qatar to help launch the English language website for Al Jazeera. And during her freelance years, she's also worked for the BBC, CNN and many Middle Eastern broadcasters. As well as being a journalist, Yvonne is a formidable campaigner, and in 2019 she was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize for her work seeking justice against war crimes. And in March this year, Yvonne was awarded an honorary doctorate at the International Academy of Diplomatic Action in Bern. Yvonne is also Secretary General for the European Muslims League, a leading interfaith group promoting greater understanding between religious backgrounds. But Yvonne, if we can rewind and go back a wee bit to 2001, it was then that you caught the headlines yourself when you were captured by the ruling Taliban in Afghanistan after, as chief reporter for the Sunday Express, you, in the days leading up to the American invasion of Afghanistan, entered there undercover in a burqa. And 2 days into the mission, you were arrested as a suspected spy by the Taliban. And few people expected you to survive that ordeal, including maybe yourself. But you did. You survived after 11 days in captivity and you were released on humanitarian grounds. And it's this amazing story that you've documented in this book, In the Hands of the Taliban, which we're going to talk about today. So thank you very much for taking part in Big Lit. And having just finished this book, it's like an edge of the seat account. It reads like the best of thrillers at times, but it's also got a real underpinning of humanity and insight. And I've got so many questions to ask about it, so I'm delighted to get the chance to talk to you. I mean, this book is interesting on so many levels because as well as this kind of thriller, adventure element, there's also this humanity that at the start of the book, you are a young mum, single mum. You've got a 12-year-old daughter, I think she was at the time in school.
A little bit younger, she was.
Younger. Okay. And you are sallying forth into this impending war zone governed by the Taliban. There must have been so many conflicting thoughts going through your mind. What was it that drove you to leave the safety of home? Because you didn't have to go there and go into Afghanistan on the cusp of war to tell the story to the world.
I'm incredibly competitive, still am, and the thing that drives most journalists is the byline, the exclusive tag, and I wanted to get the best story possible in Afghanistan during the build-up to the war. And that was quite a tall order because there were 3,000 journalists all wanting to do the same. Who were camped in Pakistan waiting for the war to kick off. That was going to take a couple of weeks to assemble all the firepower and the military. And so I decided to jump the gun and go in under the cover of a burqa and try and get a story that nobody else would get.
And also to get that story about war on a human level as well. I mean, the fact that you wear the burqa, that's another element of the book that I found really fascinating, was women in war. Because you start off as this, war correspondent, you're barking out orders, you're getting a team together, guide, various other people under your command really, and then when you don the burqa in order to be invisible pretty much and move about, those same people that know you and know you as the feisty woman that you are they start to treat you completely differently, don't they? That you are seen as invisible to them as well. You're treated, you know, like they leave you in a car for hours, boiling like a dog. They ignore you when you speak to them. How did that feel? And it's such a rapid change as well.
It was incredible. It was like flicking off a switch. I suddenly became a non-person, a lesser being, and these men, you know, who I was ordering around, suddenly completely ignored me psychologically. For them as well, you know, the burqa was a barrier, and they just saw me as something else. But the burqa is also a fantastic garment for an undercover journalist, because once you put it on, you do become invisible. Nobody pays any attention to you. So I was able to wander around quite freely without anybody giving me a second look. You know, I was just another non-person. And so I was able to observe quite a lot from underneath the burqa, but it was stifling, it was hot, and I wouldn't want to wear it voluntarily, for sure.
No, but I guess you couldn't have asked for a better insight into what it really is like to be a person living in Afghanistan, a female, you know, enduring war, because you were living it yourself.
Yes, well, it was like putting on Harry Potter's magic cloak. You know, I just became invisible, and that was something that was. It was also quite liberating in a bizarre sort of way, because I was wandering around in this burqa, not concerned about my makeup, my hair, does my bum look big in this? You know, you're just completely sort of flattened out in this this garment. So nobody is going to judge you physically in any way.
But for all you're not dressing up, there is a kind of, maybe not social aspect to war, but you paint a really vivid picture of the sort of cavalcade of war correspondence overseas as well. I mean, I know that's not your métier, but you know, you were plunged into that, and so you're rubbing shoulders with people like John Simpson or Mary Colvin, and you get this sense that although the reporters are solitary creatures and they're out there to get the story, they guard their sources, there's also a camaraderie there too, and folk are exchanging tips and even letting people copy notes, and you know, there's a sense that everyone's looking out for each other too. So how did that feel? That sounded like a community within a community almost, that, you know, by day you're being an Afghan woman, and by night you're sort of sitting chatting and chewing the fat with adventurers, they felt like.
Yes, well, there is this community, and you mentioned Mary Colvin. I mean, she was tragically killed in Syria. She was an incredible person, and her eyewitness accounts were so powerful because she wasn't interested in firepower, the size of someone's gun, what a missile could do, tanks or fighter jets or Apache attack helicopters. She just ignored all of the military hardware and went straight into the heart of humanity and brought a human story. And that is something that, you know, quite a few war correspondents are unable to do. But predominantly women get in there and they bring this humanity back and deliver it, and that is a face of war that until a few decades ago was rarely covered. But the likes of Christina Lamb and Mary Colvin, and you know, they really did approach a war from the perspective of the victims, which were predominantly women.
Yeah, and obviously you do that yourself, and that's part of your mission. And there's a really poignant part of the book where, not long before your capture, you visit, you're part of a wedding party, in a town called Kama. And you get the chance afterwards that people come and, into a sort of darkened room and like take off their outside personas and they're just honest with you, and they talk about what it feels like for them under the Taliban. They talk about just the simple things about wanting peace, wanting not to have enemies, one girl wants to just go back to her studies as a doctor. It's a lovely moment in time, and then later on in the book we find that place has probably been bombed to smithereens by US bombs. But that moment of reality, like you're saying, it paints such a bigger picture about the impact of war.
It was eye-opening because up until that point, the news coverage of Afghanistan, I felt, was one-dimensional. Women were portrayed in the burqa. Nobody went underneath the burqa to find out who was there. The woman, the young woman you refer to, she was training to be a doctor. Now that surprised me because according to Bush and Blair, the women weren't allowed to be educated, girls weren't allowed to go to school, and yet it was a lie. They were educated. They were going to school. The young girl who was aspiring to become a doctor, her medical school closed down because of lack of funding, not because the Taliban went, oh, we can't have women being educated. And so that was eye-opening. There was another woman there who was very loud and ebullient and strong. And this is not, the stereotypical shy, oppressed creature that we were told about, the Afghan woman cowering beneath the burqa. I don't think this woman would cower in front of anyone. So it was, I was only there a short time, but it was so valuable to see and interact with these women.
Yeah. If we can move then, this is not long, as I say, before your subsequent capture, which the whole book really pivots around. So I wonder if just in your own words you could kind of set the scene for what happened, because it is an edge of the seat moment. I can see it in a film, and how you felt at the time and thereafter.
We were heading back towards the Pakistan border, and my feet were cut and blistered from the shoes I'd been wearing. So I complained, and my guide said, well, we'll get a donkey. And they took me to this string of motley beasts that were tied up, and they did some sort of deal with the donkey trader. And one of them said, can you ride a donkey? And I went, look at them. I ride horses, I gallop, I go over fences. These are the same shape, but they're smaller. Of course I can ride a donkey. And so, they got this donkey, and I got on the animal, and I'm just trying to adjust myself in the seat, and it tore off, and crowds just scattered, and the wind caught my burqa, which was flapping, which made the animal more terrified, so it was going faster and faster. I'm trying to get hold of the reins, and I'm shouting, "Flaming Nora!" and the animal was heading straight towards a Taliban soldier. I don't know if he stopped the animal and pulled me off, or if the animal just stopped and threw me off, but one way or another I went up into the air and landed at the feet of this soldier, and I pulled myself up, and I'm looking through the grill of my burqa thinking, this is it, I've been caught by the most evil, brutal regime in the world. And I'm looking through the burqa, and for a nanosecond, and it was just a nanosecond, I looked at this man and I thought, my goodness, you are gorgeous. He had these amazing green eyes, those trademark green eyes captured by the National Geographic's famous portrait of the Afghan girl. High cheekbones, a wild mane of hair, a big bristly beard. I mean, he looked looked really, he could have been on the front cover of Vogue. He was gorgeous. But as I say, that was just a nanosecond, and then the reality kicked in. And he's shouting and screaming at me, and I handed over my camera, and I stood back and closed my eyes because I expected I was going to be shot. And my eyes were shut for about 10 seconds, which is a long time when you're waiting to be shot. And I opened them again, and he'd gone. He'd gone to the donkey trader. He wanted to find out who was in charge of this woman, and then we'll find out who's responsible for the camera. And I thought, he doesn't realise I'm a Westerner. I can get away. And so I turned and saw another group walking past with 2 women wearing burqas, and I just thought, what's one more burqa? Nobody's going to notice me. And so I joined that group. And as I walked away, I made the biggest mistake. I turned round and saw my 2 guides had been pulled up, and they were being questioned, and I just thought, I can't leave them. And so I turned and went back.
So you could have maybe got away.
I think I
hadn't pulled you in another direction.
Yeah, I think I could have got away, and I have since met my guides, and we've discussed this, and they said that I should have kept on walking because they thought that they would be able to talk their way out of this. But when I came back, it was like, oh no, go away.
You only know who you are at the point of adversity, don't you? And that's your character, that you weren't going to walk away and leave them because you'd got them into that, so you felt an obligation to go back. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, you didn't know, I guess, what was going to unfold, because it ended up with you being incarcerated for 11 days?
11 days. And, you know, every night I would go to sleep, I'd think, is this my last night on earth? And every morning I would wake up thinking, is this my last day? I genuinely thought that they were going to execute me. They gave me no hint. I mean, they treated me with courtesy and respect that I hadn't expected, but I genuinely thought that I would die.
But I mean, the understandable thing in those circumstances that most normal people would probably do is you would curl up, you would be terrified, you would be shivering in the corner of your cell, you would be so compliant and meek. But not Yvonne Ridley. You, for some reason, and I'm not even clear in the book if you know yourself why you do it, but you go completely opposite way, and you decide you're going to be the prisoner from hell, and you kick up a fuss from day one. You demand a better cell. You don't want to be treated with disrespect. You don't want to be unchaperoned. You're laying down the law and giving it loudly. And did you surprise yourself with that response? Was it born from fear, or did you think this is the best way I've got of surviving, by being bolshy?
I think I was probably in mental meltdown. I think that's what was really happening. I genuinely thought I was going to die. So once you get over that fear that you're going to die, there's nothing else to be afraid of. And so I just thought, all I need to do is accelerate it, be the prisoner from hell, and they'll either take me out and shoot me, in which case that's the end of it, and we'll not have 20 years of rotting in a prison, or they'll let me go. And against all the odds, while they held on to other Westerners, they did let me go.
So you're arrested and you're taken eventually to Kabul prison. One thing that struck me right at the start of the book is, in the sort of very early pages, you talk about how that going to sleep can prove terminal, that there's this sense you've got a real lust for life, you're a sort of human dynamo, you never stop, sleep's for losers. And then how somebody like that coped with being incarcerated. You're constrained, you're maybe death is around the next corner, or like you say, 20 years of captivity. And when you're in Kabul, you meet some American evangelical aid workers mostly women who've been there for quite some time, and that was really quite distressing because there's some of the girls have kind of got the lay of the land and they try and help you out, but there's one young girl in particular that's really not coping very well with being inside, and that must have been, I'd imagine, worse for you to see what might be coming down the tracks for you.
Well, yes, there was one of the American girls, she did have a breakdown, and she was panicking and screaming, and it was frightening, and you know, I was thinking, well, what will I be like 3-4 months down the line? And so it was alarming, but happily I can say now, you know, I enjoy my 8 hours sleep. I read somewhere that 70% of people die in their sleep, and this kept me awake at night. So I really didn't sleep very well, but yes, being in a confined space, I don't do prison very well.
Especially not Kabul prison. But all the way through, you insist on your captors seeing you as a human being first and foremost, don't you?
Yes.
And it pays off. Or maybe it would have always. That's also, you know, like you say, your captors have been demonised. So you're treating them like people, they're treating you like a person too.
Yes, well, it is interesting because their spiritual leader at the time, a man called Mullah Omar, did have he was always releasing edicts, Islamic edicts, and one of his fatwas was about the treatment of prisoners of war, and you know, he was very keen that there would be no torture, no abuse, which I wasn't aware of at the time that this document was in existence. And I have to say, it was only on the point of being released that I realised that I had been treated throughout the whole ordeal with courtesy and respect.
Yeah, but it's with hindsight because you don't know what's coming next, and that was a really interesting facet too, that behind the scenes there's a lot of work going on amongst the journalistic community, amongst your friends and family, you know, to get political help back home, to make sure your name is everywhere and that people don't forget about you. But you wouldn't have known any of that being where you were.
No idea any of that was going on. No idea. That's the other thing. You know, I went from being in an environment which is 24/7 news, on text, on TV, on radio, by mobile phone, and suddenly all this multi-communication and information stopped. And for 2 days, not 2 days, for the 11 days, I was without any information at all. And of course, that is the lifeblood of any journalist. And it was really very tough.
Yeah. But also, during that time, you have, you know, in prison where you're cut off, not knowing what the next day is going to bring, you go into yourself as well. You have some time for, I don't know, soul searching is the right word, but you, I mean, ultimately you end up going out of prison into the sort of anti-war movement, and then you begin to study the Quran and you begin to embrace Islam as well. And it's not, again, the sort of response people might have anticipated, but it seems like it was a watershed in your life.
Being bombed by America and Britain, which happened on my last night in captivity, I don't know why it had never occurred to me before, from covering wars and conflict, and bombs don't discriminate. They can't tell Afghan, English, they can't tell civilian from military. And I just thought, my God, I'm going to be killed by my own country. I'm going to be blown up by the Brits. And it was just one of, you can hear a cruise missile from 20 miles away. These were coming within half a mile of the prison, and it was terrifying. And, you know, there is nothing you can do. There's nowhere to run, there's nowhere to hide. And I really thought, you know, if the Taliban don't kill me, my own people will. And I sort of made a pact with the big fella, as I used to have these conversations with God, and I just said, you know, if you can get me out of here, I'm going to go straight into the anti-war movement, because this is horrendous, it's horrific. And I was lucky enough to get out. The experience also triggered an interest, and I'd given a promise to study Islam if they would let me go. And I was already a practicing Christian. I went to church maybe twice a month, which in Britain is bordering on fanaticism, let's face it. But so I had this core belief in God anyway. And I realised that unlike me going to church on a Sunday, Islam is a way of life for people. It's the way they eat, the way they sleep, the way they behave, the way they dress. And so I thought, if I am to report with any degree of accuracy on the Arab and Muslim world, I need to know more about Islam. And so I started to read the Quran, and it was the fulfillment of a promise that I'd given my captors, but it was also to educate myself. And very soon that educational journey turned into a spiritual one. And then 2 years later, to everyone's surprise, I went from hard drinking, 40 fags a day smoker, to a Muslim, and stopped drinking, stopped smoking eventually, and embraced Islam.
And then you had another big change where you now live in the borders of Scotland. So you've moved from the city as well, the buzz of that life, to living what sounds like a rural idyll with animals, and you're a beekeeper as well, I believe?
A beekeeper, and I run a peafowl sanctuary.
What on earth brought you there?
Well, I was working in London maybe 3 days a week, living in Soho in the heart of London. Absolutely loved it, but realised that I could also live somewhere else. And then I'd also heard about Scottish independence, and that got me quite excited, having seen the shenanigans in Westminster up close and personal for 2 decades. And the whole thought of Scotland really excited me. Of course, my daughter and my husband were saying, oh, midlife crisis, it's a breakdown. A lot of my friends said, we'll give you 6 weeks. But it was the best move that I made. I absolutely love it. The Scottish Borders is one of Scotland's best kept secrets. And it's, you know, I just absolutely love it.
Galloway's another one of its best kept secrets, I have to say. But yeah, I mean, it's a lovely part of the world, but it's isolated and it's cut off, and but maybe it allows you the freedom to be yourself as well, and not worry about the trappings of the world either. It's just the world here is what you make it, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. And I really enjoy the isolation, and I find that it's this sort of isolation really produces a creative streak. And I remember I used to say to people, oh, you know, I used to drink quite a bit. Oh, I can, you know, get creative just by having a few large glasses and right away. But actually being so sober and being in a completely peaceful, safe environment just really brings out the creativity in me until lockdown. And for some reason with lockdown, I'd hit a wall, and it's been a really unproductive period for me, and which I'm surprised about, because I'm still living in the same environment, the same house, the same fabulous countryside and the animals around me, but life has changed.
Yeah. And the world doesn't seem real anymore. Everything feels like it's shifting, so it's maybe hard to escape into a creative world when the real world feels a bit sugary.
Well, that's right. You know, it's like being caught up in an Andy Warhol movie at the moment.
But it's lasting longer than 15 minutes, sadly. Yes. But you are creative still. You're writing, and you've moved into fiction now as well. So you are a sort of 2/3 of the way almost through a trilogy. And it's a Caledonian historical trilogy. So tell us a wee bit more about that.
The trilogy is called The Caledonians, and it features the central character is a Mr. Petrie, who's a Scottish history master. And it came about because a friend of mine was bemoaning the fact that not enough Scottish history is taught in schools. And, you know, it's Bannockburn, and that's about it. So I started looking into this, and so I developed this character, this Scottish history master who's been on the go for over 500 years, and he teaches all of the landmarks in Scottish history to his pupils that are drawn from mainly the upper classes, although there's a few scholarship students in there as well. So there's themes of class and culture in there. And he's also a time traveller, and he can go backwards and forwards in time to not change history, but do a quick nip and tuck here and there, and make slight changes. And the first book is about his search for an apprentice, because he's getting quite jaded. You know, the thought of immortality no longer excites him as it used to. And the second book, which I'm working on now, is a lot darker. But great fun at the same time, and the history out there that I'm coming across is incredible. You know, the man who invented or developed the US Navy was a Scot.
Not far from here.
The father of Australia was a Scot. And these are, you know, just really important Scottish figures that have been airbrushed out of history, that children aren't being taught about. So I'm hoping to regenerate a lot of interest in this area.
It absolutely sounds fascinating, and I think you could probably do a quartet at least. I mean, trilogy almost. There is so much out there, you could keep going for forever. Yvonne, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today. Thank you for coming over to Gatehouse to see us. And yeah, I suppose one final thing I'd like to ask, just that you've had such a varied and diverse and fascinating career. What's your highlight been, or is that still to come?
I like to think it's still to come. You know, I'm still looking ahead, and so I'm hoping that yeah, that's still to come. And you know, maybe when lockdown's over and the big lit gets for 2021, I'll be able to talk about it then.
Yeah, come back and talk about your trilogy, which you'll have finished by then, won't you? I'm setting you a deadline.
Let's hope.
Well, thank you very much, Yvonne. Thank you.
Thank you.